Notice that I dared to categorize this as beginner, experienced beginner, intermediate, experienced, intermediate, advanced, and experienced, advanced. Okay guys, it's already lesson number 122 and it's time to determine how good of a tactical player you are. So in this lesson, we're going to see, I'm going to show you 6 different positions, and that's going to help us determine if you are beginner, intermediate, advanced. And the best thing about these positions is that it has to do with a very basic principle, with a very basic pattern that all of you should know. Of course, as you can see in front of you, the very first one, all of you should know at this point. And the next one is a little bit more advanced, but as you get more experience, of course, you're gonna get to it. Eventually, we'll get to a position that is not so simple. And from this position, number 3 on, is where I wanted to see the level of difficulty that you can deal with. So at the very beginning, guys, and by the way, all of these are from real games. You can see on top of me right here that I'm putting the name of the player. So if you ever want to look them up, you just go to the internet, put the name of the players, and you're gonna see these very famous games. Now, the difference between the first 2 positions and the other ones, the other 4, is that in the first one, it's just pretty straightforward. You're just going for the checkmate, something very simple. The other ones require a lot of accuracy when it comes to calculating, visualizing, because it's not gonna end up in a few moves. You need to make sure that you know what to do once you extract your opponent's king. And guys, we're talking about this pattern of sacrificing on f7. At the very beginning, I told you I really like my students to start at first learning no openings at all, but then when they start, I want them to start with king's pawn openings, the open games, because you need exposure to these patterns. Now, before anything else, I'm going to show you this position. This is position number 6. We're gonna start from 1 all the way through 6. And I'm gonna show you this one first, because if you can calculate, if you can visualize the entire thing all the way to victory, you guys don't even have to watch the entire video. But if you don't see it clearly, if you don't know what to do, then I invite you to stay, because at the very least, you're going to practice your ability to visualize, to calculate clearly. Now, the very first one, in case someone just landed on lesson number 122, well, for this one, if you don't know it, you gotta go back to lesson number 5 or 6, where we talked about check and checkmate. Believe it or not, I talked about this position back then. Now, number 2, guys, it is the same thing. I want to do checkmate on f7. My bishop could go there defended by the knight. But first, I need to eliminate the defender, which is on h5. So, of course, I know that if you're not at that level yet, you're going to hesitate before trading the queen, but that's the move. Queen takes bishop, free bishop. If they take us, well, bishop f7 and checkmate. Now, notice that I dared to categorize this as beginner, experienced beginner, intermediate, experienced, intermediate, advanced, and experienced, advanced. Now, for the first 2, of course, if you have a little bit more of experience, you're going to think of eliminating the bishop first in order to hit on f7, because you are familiar with this, right? Now, for this next one, this is intermediate, guys. If you have seen in the second position that I'm going to show you, the experienced intermediate, is a very popular game, and all of you probably have seen it, but this first one is the beginning of taking this very basic pattern to the next level. And this is where beginners cannot get, at least not until they get more experience, of course. So why is this different? Well, because this is not so much about just doing checkmate on f7. This one is going to be more about extracting the king and continuing from there. So this one, guys, already you know all of the positions that I'm going to show you, they have to do with f7, right? So sacrificing a piece or putting pressure on it. And you're going to see that the last 2, even though you know what this is all about, it is going to be hard to find the answer, because it is going to require more calculation, visualization, and so on. Now, for this one, of course, we extract the king, and since we identified this pattern of the queen being trapped, we know that without that pawn, the knight could go to e6. Now, the good thing about that pawn in this position, and that's why I put this one lower than the one you're going to see next, is because here the pawn is only defended by the king. And we know by now that's really attractive. We know that they're forced to take with the king, otherwise we get the rook, right? And then knight e6, we trap the queen. The only way for them to get the knight is with the same king, And that's how we get their king in front of their pawns. And once that king is exposed like that, it's very easy for us to get him in trouble, right? But still, we gotta calculate. So bishop f7, king takes, knight goes to e6, give me the queen, or you take with the king. Now, after that, you should be, if you're intermediate, you should be able to calculate all the way to checkmate. So once the king is on e6, we're going to go queen to d5 check. The king is forced, again, every single move is check. If we don't put him in check, they're going to activate their pieces and defend. So after the king goes to f6, the queen is going to go to f5 and checkmate. So there we go. Give me material or take. Then knight e6, give me material or take. And then finally, check, followed by checkmate. So again, guys, beginners definitely cannot see this far until they get more experienced, until they get better at calculating and visualizing. And by the way, before we go on to the next one, just for you to see how this came out of a king's pawn opening, let me show you quickly, guys, the first few moves and also how the game ended, because of course the black pieces did not take on e6. Now again, you can see on top of me the name of the players in case you want to look this game up later. But anyways, quickly, it was e4, e5, so king's pawn opening, and then we get bishop c4, the Italian game, right? So pawn to d4, then castle. Notice that they are speeding up the development, putting the king in safety so that the rook could come over instead of picking up the pawn right away. So knight takes d4, bishop e7, knight c3, castle, h3, and then after rook e8, rook e1, we have knight to d7. Big mistake. That's what leaves the queen trapped, and then you saw the rest. Now, at this point, the black pieces did not capture. They just went knight e5. That way the queen can get out. And now, instead of taking, and we've talked about this so many times, you see a good move and our instinct is to just go for it. We play impulsively. So instead of doing so, the white pieces here said, you know what? Let me incorporate the queen with check. And now the same thing. If they take, we have queen f5 checkmate. So they moved back, give me the queen now. And then after knight d5, the black pieces simply resigned. Okay, so now that you saw that exercise as well, you know that everything has to do with f7. Let me show you this again. This is position number 6. We're supposed to go to number 4 first, but maybe you guys already can see this. So you know that it all has to do with f7. See if you can find it. If not, let's put it aside. Let's keep on going. But for those of you that I know are anxious, like, oh, I'm already advanced, this is too easy for me, feel free to go back to position number 6. Okay, if not, if you cannot find it, let's carry on. So this one is one of the first games that I saw from Bobby Fischer. If you've seen it before, if you're like me, you're going to enjoy it every time. So the move here, you already know, it has to do with bishop f7. And now this one I put it a little bit more difficult than the one before, because even though it has to do with the same thing, notice that here the pawn is defended by 2 different pieces, so they're not forced to take with the king. Now, if you calculate a little bit more, bishop f7, if they take with the rook, well, we have the same move. And this is a pattern that we have to really know. Knight e6, again, the queen is trapped and there's nowhere they could go. Now, if the queen goes to c7, the knight's there. If the queen goes to b6, this bishop is going to be open. And of course, taking with the pawn, due to the lack of development, is not going to save them because the queen will be hanging. Now, the other thing that you have to calculate is after bishop goes to f7, what if the king takes? Well, of course, knight e6 has to come to mind. And the same thing with the pawn. Now, if they take with the king, you have to be able to calculate the whole thing. Feel free to pause the video right now and see if you can calculate all the way until the end. Before I show you it, let me go back to just show you the first few moves. It's going to be quick. I'm not going to go deep into it. It all starts with e4 from Fischer, then Sicilian defense. We get into the open Sicilian. And after knight d4, g6, bishop e3, knight f6, knight c3. Don't forget they're hitting the pawn on e4, and then bishop c4. That's the first indication that f7 could be in trouble, right? Now they castled. Now the king is safe, 2 pieces defending f7, bishop b3, saving that bishop, and after knight a5, we have pawn to e5. Now here, feel free to calculate, okay, what if they take first? Should I take back, or should I take on f6? They take my rook, I take on g7. So all of this, when you're reviewing games, and I've told you so many times the importance of reviewing games from masters, even on lesson 100, and I want to say 119, I showed you a feature that you could use to learn a lot from these master games, and it's here on chess.com. But anyways, here after e5, knight 98, and of course now bishop takes f7. In the game, they take with the king, knight e6, and then d takes e6. They're willing to give up the queen because they know that if they just take with the king, they are already in trouble. Guys, don't forget, king in front of the pawns, all of their pieces behind the king, this is already trouble. We just need to look for checks forcing continuation. So here we have queen d5 check. Let's try to do it in our head. King goes to f5, and then see if you can find the next move. It could be a discover check, maybe check with the pawn. Just do it in your head. Now, assuming that you already did that, let's go over it. So queen d5, king f5. Now, if you do e6, you gotta be very careful. They could block with the bishop, they could go to f6. So here instead, you gotta remember one thing. Even if you don't have the power yet to calculate all the way until the end, you gotta remember one thing. The closer you bring the king towards your pieces, the more pieces you're gonna have to attack that king. So checkmate has to be in the air. So at that point, the move is gonna be g4. Only move for them is to take, and at that point, they are in white's territory. Don't forget, this part of the board is going to be white's territory. All of my pieces are there waiting to get that king in trouble. So again, after queen d5, king f5, g4, the king takes, I gotta think, okay, is there any other piece that could come into the game with a check? Well, these are powerful pieces. Check. If the king goes to, let's say, h4, I believe we could do something like queen e4 check, then king goes to h3, queen g4, king takes h2, and then checkmate. So this is what I'm calculating. Then g4, king has to take, probably this is good as well, but this move has to be here. It has to work. It's just too many pieces, right? Then here, if they go king h4, we just got check, again, check, and then checkmate on g3 or even on g2. So guys, now that we went over these first four positions, let's get into the real difficult one. So if you were able to calculate all this, if you were able to come up with this, definitely you are an experienced intermediate. Now let's see if you can handle the advanced and experienced advanced. All right, so this is gonna be the advanced position. We have this one and one more to go. And as you can see in this one, it's not so easy to come up with a whole continuation. Of course, what I expect from you is that if you're playing a tournament game or any game and you get to this position, your brain has to think of your queen acting on e6. So that pawn is left behind, it is weak. If I could move the knight, I will be hitting it. So I gotta think of ways to maybe take on d7 or maybe something like this to attack the queen. Now, for the most part, the way that I see this is I have the rook behind, so it's like a battery, and this pawn is on f7. So you see it like that. Knight takes on f7. Instead of the bishop being sacrificed, we sacrifice a knight, getting the king out, and then we go queen e6, right? And we're gonna have so many opportunities to talk about this. But in this one, it all starts, in case you didn't know by now, it all starts with knight f7. Notice that it's a similar pattern because I'm hitting that queen, which is almost trapped due to this bishop. And here you can see the value of having your pieces active. Now, after knight f7, if they go to c8, well, at the very least, I could take on e6, and I'm threatening a discovered check afterwards. But if they take, this is the part where you need to know what to do. Now, guys, before we get into it, I'm going to show you the game from the very beginning. Again, I'm not gonna go too deep into the opening, just for you to see where this is coming from. So e4, don't forget the name of the players are on top of me. That way you can look this game up after. So again, King's Pawn opening, we go into a French opening. This is, by the way, Alekhine, 4th world champion. This is the guy who defeated Capablanca. So how to forget him? Nah, excellent player, and you're gonna see it in these two games. The last two games are from Alekhine. So after knight c3, knight f6, French defense, e takes e5, knight takes e5 instead of taking with the e pawn, right? So knight e4, and now we have pawn to f5. All of you who have been following this course, you should know how bad f5 is. And actually, a lot of you have told me that I think Ben Feingold, I think, he's the one who's always emphasizing the importance of not pushing the f-pawn. So I learned this from a lot of you guys. But we have talked about left behind pawns. Every time we move a pawn, we create weaknesses. That's exactly what happened here. So knight to g5, excellent move. We're putting pressure on that weakness already. and we're not concerned about h6 because our queen could always go to h5. We have talked about this pattern so many times. So after bishop e7, the knight goes back to f3, and even though we moved around a little and we're not hitting e6 anymore, well, we know that in front of any left behind pawn, in front of any isolated pawn, there is a weak square, and that's gonna be e5. So the knight comes to f3, ready to occupy e5. And our last lesson, 121, we talked about these guys. So c6, the knight gets there, of course, castle. Now we have the other knight developed, ready to replace this. Base of operations, we talked about this on lesson 121. All right, so b6, bishop d3, bishop b7, castle, pretty straightforward. Then c4, let's remove this guy. So look, my knight is on a weak square, so that's a good outpost. No pawn could kick me out. This one was happy on d5, but that's not a weak square. So c4 kicks the knight out, and then bishop f4, developing the last minor piece. So knight d7, queen e2, c5, and now we have knight f7. Now try to calculate, let's do it in our head first, and then you can do it yourself. Okay, so after knight f7, we are attacking the queen like we said, and then the queen is gonna take on e6, right? So after they take, we gotta calculate, what if the king takes? What if they accept it? Well, I'm expecting you guys to consider one of two moves afterwards. Knight g5, it comes with a check. I'm putting more pressure on e6, and I also hope that you considered a very strong move, even stronger than knight g5, queen takes e6. So we have talked about the importance of changing the move order. You come up with candidate moves after knight f7, king takes. The candidate moves are knight g5, it's a check. Also queen e6, it looks like nonsense, but we have to consider it. And if you think about it, queen e6, if the king takes, then knight g5 is going to be checkmate. I know that if you're not that experienced, you're not going to be able to visualize the whole thing, but you should, guys. So knight f7 is the move, king takes, then queen e6, and again, if they just take, this is checkmate, and this is a very nice checkmate. Look, so many pieces developed, the king is ahead in front of his pieces, exposed. Of course, there has to be something there. Now, what if after queen e6, the king just goes to g6? Now, this is the toughest part, and a lot of you who even got this far, that you saw queen e6, many of my students, when I showed them this, they, of course, we do it without moving the pieces, but they just cannot see the next move. And this is so important. I see so many people that they do wonderful sacrifices and then they cannot finish it. They miss the final touch. And in this case, if you have not seen it, if you don't know what the next move is, feel free to pause the video and come up with it on your own. The move here, guys, is the following. I'm putting so much pressure on f5. But the problem is that now, if I take on f5 with the queen, the king is going to go back and hide. If I take with the bishop, well, the king is going to go to h5. And still, I got to make sure that I see it all the way to checkmate. Now, the best move, and I'm pretty sure that there are more than one way to win here. Like many of you maybe thought of knight h4. Maybe you already were happy with bishop f5. Eventually, you're going to get something. But the strongest move is pawn to g4, right? So this, if you found this, then you definitely should be very proud of you, because that means that you didn't go with the flow. You didn't just say, oh, bishop f5 should work or knight h4 should work. You say, you know what? Let me look for a better move. Just like our friend Carlsen did in game, I think number 8, number 9, that he was winning, but he looked for the best move every single time. So the same thing here. So g4 comes after realizing that the king has this square. So we take it away. Don't forget there's a pin. And now, no matter what, there is checkmate on the next move. This bishop f5 is now checkmate. Also, knight h4 is checkmate. This simple move puts the end to it. In the actual game, they went bishop e4 and then knight h4 checkmate. Okay, so we're finally here with the last position, and I know that I have been through all of this very quickly, but with this one, we're gonna take a little bit more of time. Now, let me show you actually, the last position here was knight h5. So the black pieces are just offering this trade, just trying to release the pressure. But you all know by now that we're looking for these kind of sacrifices on f7. Now, I have to tell you, in all of these positions that I've shown you, even though, like I said at the beginning, even though they had to do with the sacrifice on f7, the checkmates that we have gotten at the end, they are very different, because again, even though it all starts with that basic pattern, in order to convert this into a win, we have to make sure that our ability to visualize, to calculate, and that in general, our pattern recognition are a different level. because it's not just 2-3 moves. It has to be, before we sacrifice, we have to calculate many moves in advance. Now, I know that you already worked on it for a while, but feel free to take one last chat to see if you can calculate the whole thing. Now, in this one, I have to tell you, this one is not as clear as any of the others before. You have to really trust your intuition, and that's where doing lots of tactics reviewing games comes handy, because something is going to tell you, you know what, after the king is exposed, after the king is ahead of his pawns and restricted, there has to be something. You got to trust your intuition. Of course, if you are at a different level, you can calculate everything clearly, perfect. But if you don't, your intuition is going to guide you sometimes. So here the move is going to be, of course, knight takes f7. If the king takes, we have bishop e6, and we continue to extract that king. Now we have to calculate if the king takes, but we gotta ask ourselves as well, what if the king just goes back? We have to think about that. Now, if the king takes e6, this is the first one that I want you guys to calculate, and try to do it without moving the pieces. I'm gonna move the pieces in a moment, but after knight f7, king takes f7, bishop e6, king takes e6. The king is right there at this moment. See if you can find the best continuation. If you can't, then listen to the next hint that I'm going to give you. So I trust that you paused the video, worked on it. Now, the hint is, after the king is on e6, you have checkmate in 4 moves, forced. Everything is forced. It's check, 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 and checkmate. So see if you can visualize all of that. Well, I trust that you already worked on it. This is what we're calculating. Of course, knight takes f7, king takes, then bishop takes e6, king takes e6. Now, don't forget, we gotta look into king f8 as well. So after bishop e6, if the king doesn't take and hides on f8, we have to calculate that as well. But if they take at that moment when the king is on e6, the queen is going to replace the bishop on that diagonal. And guess what? There's nothing they could use to block the check with. So they have to go to d6. Now, after d6, after the king is on d6, the king is restricted. It cannot go anywhere. So we're going to do pawn to e5. Almost checkmate, but the knight could take. And when the knight takes, guys, I know this is already confusing, but bear with me. After the knight takes on e5, we're going to take with the pawn. And not only is that check with the pawn, it is check with the rook. So it's double check. The king has to come over to c5. And then I think knight a4 has to be checkmate. Yes, that's really complicated. I know. So anyways, let's do it on the board. That way you can see it. Bishop takes e6. Then we said queen b3, only move. And then check, only move. And now notice how the rook opens up to do a double check. The king has to come to c5. And now knight a4 is definitely checkmate. Now, even if you do not calculate this far, again, many times you just feel it. You know that there's so many pieces, the king is exposed, there has to be checkmate somehow, right? So keep that in mind. Now, let's take a look at lastly, and I really invite you to do this on your own without moving the pieces to practice your ability to calculate. In the real game, after bishop e6, the black pieces went to f8, and the remaining of the game is, like I said, more complicated, not so easy to see, but the fact that the king is restricted on f8, the queen is out of the game. If you have followed this course in order up to this point, your intuition should be telling you, you know, there has to be something here. So here, Alekhine just continue with e5, very powerful move, g6, then bishop a6 check. Every time that a pawn moves, there are weaknesses created, and in this case, this diagonal becomes open for the bishop. So the knight goes to g7, only move, and again, all of their pieces are tied up, the king is restricted. So now, rook e3, you saw this in our last stream. We have talked about this rook lift, rook rollover. I think we talked a lot about it on the lesson on the Kali system. So lesson 104. Rook e3, we know what we're looking for. And guys, again, even though this is not forcing, many of you might be like, oh, this is too slow. Well, it's going to take a lot of moves for the black pieces to get these pieces active. So if you want, just imagine you being the black pieces here. It's really uncomfortable. Actually, sorry for doing this. I know it's going to be confusing, but imagine with the black pieces here. Look at this. Our king is in trouble. All of these pieces cannot help us. We know this move is coming, but what can we do about it? And I've been here myself in this situation, so I know the feeling. So anyways, after rook e3, we have pawn to c5. At least the bishop could control f3. Then knight d5. Of course, we see this is the problem. We got to find a solution. We eliminate the bishop, obstruct the bishop, or try to deflect it. In this case, they're going to blockade. So knight d5, bishop takes. Now that's not a problem anymore. Same thing now for the black pieces. All of their problems are the same. So c takes d4, rook f3 of course, knight f6, and now here, take your time, there's a brilliant move, and if you want, let's do what we have practiced up to this point. Candidate moves, guys. We've talked so much about candidate moves. So a lot of you are going to be thinking immediately of rook takes f6 check, but I know you're going to be concerned about your queen being hanging at the same time. Well, if you calculate hard enough, you're going to see that rook f6 actually works, because after bishop takes, well, we don't have to worry about the queen because we have e takes f6, and we're saying, you know what, I dare you to take the queen, because now with the pawn here, the bishop controlling the king, I could just take, and that's checkmate. So guys, this is one of those games that is extremely important for you to actually set up this position, or even from before, set it up on the board and try to calculate, visualize without moving the pieces. It might be a little bit boring, maybe you don't even get it right, but you don't know how much you're going to improve your ability to visualize, to calculate 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 moves ahead. And the best thing about this position is that there are different variations. It is really complicated. It's not just one line with 20 moves. It's multiple lines with so many pieces. There's so many surprises here. So anyways, after rook takes, bishop takes, pawn takes, threatening checkmate if the rook leaves. So rook e5, check, rook takes, and then look, of course, Alekhine did not calculate this far, but he again, his intuition was telling him that was the way to go. So from here, again, this rook is going nowhere. Now we want to capitalize on the light squares. So bishop b3, d3, queen c4, we know what that was for. And now we throw in checkmate here because, again, the rook is pinned. So after queen c4, the black pieces resigned. There's nothing they can do. Now, guys, again, I probably went really quickly over these positions, but feel free to look up the game. You can see this is Alekhine, and you can see his opponent as well. Look up the game and try to reproduce it. Now, one thing before I let you go, I found the game on this website. We've used it before, I've shown you, so let me just go back here. So you go to chessgames.com, and or if you Google it, it's gonna take you here anyways. And I've said this before, but I'm gonna say it one more time. When you're reviewing your games, don't forget, you could just go one move at a time, see, and it's showing you, or you could do the 2x2, the 3x3. So you could say, you know what, let me look at the first two moves. It says down here, e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6. So I imagine that on the board, e4, c5, knight f3, and then knight to c6. So try to visualize that. It's gonna help you with your visualization. Only when you see it clearly on the board, you go ahead and you move it, right? Then I go to the next two, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4. And if this is just too easy for you, you could do a 3x3. Look at the first three for white and black, do it in your head, and so on. If you're doing that, by the time you get to this position and you continue 2x2, 3x3, it's gonna be so challenging, but it's gonna help you a lot. Now, again, you find the game. If you wanna bring it to Chess or chess.com, you look down here, it says PGN, view. You're going to go ahead and select, you copy, and then you go here to chess.com. You could just, let me see, you go to tools and you just paste, import, and just like that, you have the games. Let me see, you have the game right there to reproduce it. Look, now Chess is even giving you a lot of feedback on the left. You could activate the engine and so on. So guys, I'm going to leave it here, and I hope that you found some value in these lessons. I know that maybe a lot of information, but it is time for us to approach tactics like this. So like always, let me know in the comments where you think you stand. If you're beginner, experienced beginner, intermediate, experienced intermediate, advanced, or if you get the last one right, then you're definitely experienced grandmaster level advanced.